Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Cellar Chats. It's me, Chris, in the cellar, here at Second Glass. Sorry I missed you all last week. I had oral surgery to get the process started to get my tooth back. Yeah, still missing that. And I was unable to come in and film, but fortunately we had an amazing flight, and I'm sure some of you came out and had that. I hope so. And then this week, you know, it may say on the calendar that it's March 1st, but it feels a whole lot like July 1st outside. So we are going full on rosé from California because it is hot, sunny, beautiful, and you know what? We just need some refreshing pink wine in our lives. So we're going to start out with kind of a go-to favorite here at the Second Glass, Curran. This is their Grenache Gris, so rosé of Grenache from Santa Barbara County. Going to roll into a personal favorite of mine, Ryme Cellars rosé of Aglianico from Clarksburg out in Lodi. And then round it out back in Santa Barbara, this is Lieu, their rosé of Cab Franc. So let's get this rolling. I mean, other than the fact that, you know, it looks like yellow snow outside, it is lovely to have this weather. I personally would like it to be a little cooler. You know, again, it is March 1st, not June or July 1st. But take the great weather while we get it. So, starting out, again, this is Curran, their Grenache Gris. These guys are based in Santa Barbara. And I'm not entirely sure. I'm trying to check. So, it's really confusing. So, they call it Grenache Gris, but I'm going to call this... So, Gris oftentimes... you know, in French, translates roughly to like kind of gray. So they will use that for different styles of like rosé. So there's commonly, or at least there used to be, a common term used in France in certain regions for rosé. They would call it vin gris, so gray wine. And it wasn't actually gray wine, it was just meant slightly colored wine. And a little confusing because I wasn't entirely sure, but Grenache Gris is actually a like biotype of Grenache. So there's Grenache Blanc, there's Grenache Rouge, and there's a Grenache Gris. This is actually just Grenache Noir, as far as I know, made as a rosé, if you wanted to know where that Gris came from. Wow. On the nose, so explosive with like fruit characteristics, which is, you know, you look at the color of this and, you know, I hate to drone on about color, but it's hard not to talk about it when we're talking about rosé. We look at it all the time. This is very, very pale. I would call this like a classic onion skin color. I don't know how much that shows up in the camera, but it looks pretty onion skin. But on the nose, it is pretty explosive with like really beautiful fruit. A little like, little lemon, a little strawberry, almost like a strawberry lemonade kind of characteristic going on. Not like sweet like lemonade, but you know, that's what it's giving me. Maybe a little Kool-Aid character. Just very fruity and beautiful and inviting. Oh, wow. Yeah, palate, bright, fresh. Kind of bring a little bit of that like pink lemonade thing going on, more on the like, obviously refreshing, like bright acidity characteristic than like the sweet pink lemonade. Like I'm not talking about like, you know, the bargain stuff you get in the grocery store. Like you made this at home with maybe some fresh berries and like really good lemons and just enough sugar to keep it from like making your whole mouth pucker. Again, this is not sweet. Please don't take it that way. I shouldn't use the word sugar because it has negative connotations, but I just like to say things as it is. We need to move past those negative connotations. That's my plan. We're going to go with it. This wine's exceptional and a great way to start this flight, truly. Again, that is Curran. They are part of, it's the D'Alfonso Curran wines. So they make a couple of different wines. If I remember correctly, they make wines under Curran, and then they make wines under D'Alfonso in Santa Barbara. I would call them a little bit like kind of an under the radar, but they've been around for a while. Just really solid, great value wines. All right, moving into, I mean, I like all of these, let's be honest, but I have a soft spot for Ryme Cellars. I love what they do. I love the wines. And yes, it is because they work with a lot of Italian grape varieties. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. So this is Aglianico Rosé, so Rosé of Aglianico. Aglianico is a grape variety found primarily in Campania and Basilicata in southern Italy. Here being grown in Clarksburg. And Ryme really got their start as a winery working with Aglianico, making red wines. They make, I think, 3 or 4 different like dry still red wines, and then they make this yearly release of Aglianico Rosé from a vineyard that they only make rosé from. And if I again remember the story correctly, this vineyard tends to struggle to get to ripeness, so making a dry still red wine isn't necessarily always a capability. But to make a really fresh, delicious rosé, it's actually perfect because it retains a lot of acidity and it gets enough ripeness to do a rosé style wine, but not enough to turn it into a red wine. We're not going to talk about the technical, aspects of all of that. So what I've always really enjoyed about this is there's this cut through of minerality, inviting freshness, whereas this Curran is very citrus, kind of bright acidity freshness. This is more of a cleansing, delicate mineral, I don't know, it's like drinking mineral water kind of freshness to it, along with kind of subtle strawberry and a little bit of dried herb notes, which is that classic Aglianico characteristic. The nose is much more subtle than the Curran, but as it opens up, you can tell there's a lot more complexity. There's a little bit more of that, again, like I said, herbaceous mixed with strawberry red fruits. Oh, that is so good. And texturally, on the palate, it's a little more rounded. There's a little more fruit, and that makes a lot of sense. Aglianico is a much darker, bigger, fuller, I wouldn't call it richer, but it's definitely a fuller wine, a lot more tannically structured, whereas Grenache is a little softer. It's known for bright acidity, lots of red fruit. It can handle heat really well, so it ripens really well. Aglianico, generally it ripens well, but it needs a long growing season, and it needs a decent amount of heat and sunlight, but it also needs more time to get there. And this really has so pretty, lots and lots of texture. That's really kind of the standout. Minerality and roundness on the palate is telltale for this wine. Loving that, very much so. That is, again, Ryme Cellars, their Aglianico Rosé. And I did not mention, this is 2022 release vintage, so these last two just landed on the market. The Curran, we're still playing around with a little bit of the 2021, which is not a bad thing. If you get one thing from this, and I think I said on the last rosé class, is that don't turn your nose up to rosé that is not the most current vintage. Rosé is just like any other wine. It is perfectly delicious. 1, 2, 3, and depending on the wine, maybe 4 or 5 years out of vintage or more. But do not get caught up in the idea that it is 2023, so I'm only drinking rosé from 2022. That's a crazy sentiment. No one really says that about white wine. I mean, they might, but I disagree with them. Yes, do they tend to be really great earlier? Sure they do. But just because it's, an extra year or two out of vintage does not mean it's not going to be delicious. In fact, in many ways, it might be more. All right, anyway, I'll get off of my soapbox there. Last but not least, Lieu, their rosé of Cab Franc. For a long time, they actually made this from Pinot Noir. In the last couple of vintages, they switched over to Cab Franc just to experiment a little bit, and they really, really liked what it was doing. And it just makes more sense. Their focus is on, Loire Valley grape varieties primarily, and although there is Pinot Noir grown in the Loire Valley, Cab Franc is really king. And in fact, Cab Franc-based rosés from the Loire Valley are exceptional. You just don't hear about them a lot, because I think that most people, when they hear Cab Franc, they aren't entirely sure, they think that it's going to be like a Cabernet Sauvignon rosé, and it might be a little bit weird. But Cab Franc makes really delicate, beautiful rosés. So here, a little more punch of brightness. I get like a good amount of like fresh acidity, more like tart raspberry pomegranate fruit than like kind of that strawberry, like a little bit like, I'll call it fruitier fruit. This is more like robust fruit. Yeah, we'll go with that. Robust fruit. That sounds good. So this wine, I mean, Lieu, I think does a great job across the board. It's really hard to argue that. Particularly Cab Franc is their like strong suit. They've got other things that they do really well, but the Cab Franc is really where they shine. They make incredible Sauvignon Blancs and things like that. And I love seeing them make a rosé from Cab Franc because it's just not that super common, particularly on the West Coast. Oh, again, and I hadn't tasted these because they just landed. I mean, I've tasted them several times, but I hadn't tasted them recently. And it's so pretty to see this super bright, really fresh, high acidity, like kind of what I would call telltale classic rosé. And then we move into the Ryme, a little more rounded, a little more fruit, kind of subtle on the nose, but there's a lot of fruit on the palate. And then you get to the Lieu, which is, an absolutely beautiful color, kind of like the epitome of perfect rosé color. And again, it brings more mouthfeel than the Ryme, but even more fruit and a little more texture while still being really bright and fresh and doing all the things we want rosé to do. So I don't know what your excuse is. It's beautiful outside. Start texting your friends right now. Second glass, they open at like 4:35, and you need to be here drinking these wines and enjoying the sunshine. I mean, if you have pollen and allergy issues, maybe just, have a couple of spritzes of like nasal spray or take like 3 extra pills, because that stuff is no joke. But the weather is great and the wines are killer. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see y'all next week.